The first sound I register is the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It is steady clipped, too bright in the white of the operating room. Overhead, the lights wash everything in a hard, colorless glare. I feel the tug of my mask against my cheekbones and the heat of my own breath as I pass the scalpel into Dr. Cole Whitman's outstretched hand. He does not look at me when he takes it. Scalpel, he says, even though it is already there. His fingers close around the handle, confident and sure. Mine fall back to my side for half a heartbeat, then I move again. Clamp, gauze, suction. My movements are automatic, the choreography of 100 similar mornings. Clamp, he says. I'm already holding it out. His eyes stay on the open chest in front of him, on the beating heart framed in metal and plastic. His voice is smooth. It always is. Maya, try to keep up. You're just a nurse, not a mind reader. The words land lightly, almost playful to anyone listening from the doorway. The scrub tech beside me shifts her weight, a tiny sound of fabric against fabric. No one answers. No one ever does. I feel my jaw tighten behind the mask. The metal of the clamp is cold against my gloved palm. For a moment, I imagine closing my hand until it snaps. Instead, I set it neatly back on the tray, line it up with the others, and pick up the suction. The heart on the monitor spikes, then settles. The anesthesiologist murmurs something to his resident. The circulating nurse moves to scan a barcode. Cole leans closer to the field, voice dropping. Good, now let's not lose any more time. I know the rhythm of his operations. I can feel when he will ask for a stitch, when he will need more retraction, when his voice will curl into sharpness, because someone did not move fast enough. My hands move a half second ahead of his words. He never notices that part. 40 minutes later, the new valve is in. The beeping softens into a slow, even pattern. Cole steps back, shoulders relaxing as if the room has fulfilled its purpose. Close, he says. Brooks makes sure the report reflects the medication change. Last thing we need is recovery screwing it up. Yes, doctor. My voice sounds flat to my own ears. I help with the closing count instruments twice, watch the nurse at the computer type in the orders he just dictated. When the patient is wheeled out, the air in the OR loosens a little. Cole pulls off his gloves, drops them in the red bin. Next case in 30, he says. Try not to let the schedule fall apart. He leaves without waiting for a response. The door swings shut behind him, soft and final. The scrub tech, Jenna, exhales. I swear, she mutters, one day someone is going to throw a clamp at his head. I pull off my own gloves, careful not to snap them. Then we would have to chart it, I say. She snorts, the closest thing to laughter either of us has energy for, and we begin the quiet work of resetting the room. In the break room, the fluorescent lights hum low over stained tile and mismatched chairs. The coffee machine burps steam in the corner. Someone has left a box of donuts on the counter, already half empty. Luis is slouched at the table, scrolling his phone with one hand, a sandwich in the other. He did it again, Jenna says, dropping into the chair across from him. You'd think we were interns who wandered into the wrong building. Luis does not look up. He told me yesterday, you're just a nurse, Morales, let the grown-ups handle it, he says. Because I pointed out the potassium was off. 5 minutes later, he tells the resident to recheck it. Suddenly, it's his great catch. Jenna rolls her eyes. Classic. I pour myself coffee. I do not want. Listen to the small, tired chorus. Stories of being talked over, of warnings, ignored, of ideas, repeated and suddenly considered brilliant when they come from a white coat. They look to me sometimes as if waiting for me to add my own story to the pile. I give them small pieces, the safer ones. A time on nights when I caught a blood pressure drop before it became a code. The time I convinced a resident to call for a CT. I do not tell them about the worst nights I have had. Those nights did not happen in this building. Jenna's gaze lingers on my face. What about you, Brooks? She asks. He riding you harder than usual today. It's Tuesday, I say. He has a full board. He'll get over it. She snorts again but lets it drop. My break is 12 minutes long. At minute 10, my pager vibrates. Recovery needs a hand with a confused patient pulling at his lines. I tip my coffee into the sink untouched and head back into the maze of white halls. The shift ends in the gray of late afternoon, the kind of Seattle light that feels like someone pressed a filter over the world. The rain is fine and constant when I step outside, beating on my scrub jacket. I take the bus home. The seats are worn, the windows fogged. A kid with earbuds sleeps against the glass. 2 rows up, a woman in a raincoat stares at her phone. Outside, the city slides past in streaks of wet neon. My building is an old brick block a few minutes from the waterfront. The hallway smells faintly of laundry detergent and someone's cooking. Inside my apartment, it is quiet except for the familiar low whir of the fridge. I drop my bag on the chair, toe off my shoes, and click on the TV without looking at the screen. Noise fills the room, the announcer's voice too loud. I turn it down until it is only a background murmur. On the coffee table, a ring of water stains has marked where I have set down too many mugs and too few coasters. I go to the kitchen, fill a glass from the tap. From the TV, a helicopter's rotors spin up in surround sound, part of some action sequence. The blades chop the air in a pattern that is too familiar. My hand tightens around the glass. For a moment, the room narrows at the edges. Beep, beep, beep. Not the monitor this time. My heart, my throat goes dry. I reach for the remote, thumb the volume down until the rotors fade into silence. I focus on the weight of the glass in my palm, the smoothness of the countertop under my other hand. In the cabinet above the stove, behind a stack of unused mixing bowls, there is a small metal tin. It is unremarkable, dull silver edges dented. I take it down and set it on the table. The lid resists at first, then gives with a soft scrape. Inside, everything is where I left it. A pair of dog tags on a dull chain, a scrap of tan fabric stained darker in the center, a photograph with curled edges of 13 men in dusty uniforms squinting at the camera. On top of them all is a folded piece of paper. The crease has gone soft from being opened and closed. I slide it out and unfold it. 17 November. Nothing else, no names, no explanations. I sit back in the chair, the rain ticking against the window, the TV light flickering across the wall. The metal of the tin is cool under my fingertips. My hands are clean. No blood, no dust. Just the faint pale scars that never quite went away crossing my knuckles like fine white threads. I fold the paper again, slower this time, and put it back in its place. Then I close the lid. The metal tin sits on the table closed again, but my mind does not follow the lid. It slides backward past the rain on the window and the hum of the fridge, past the monitors and white corridors, to a kitchen that smelled like fried chicken and laundry soap. The table in my parents' house in Columbus, Georgia, was scarred with knife marks from years of Sunday dinners. That night, it held a pot of green beans, a pan of biscuits, and the weight of what I was about to say. Ethan was the first to notice I was not eating. "You are poking that chicken like it owes you money," he said, mouth full. Mom shot him a look. "Chew first, talk later." I set my fork down. My fingers left a faint grease print on the wood. "I talked to a recruiter today," I said. The ceiling fan clicked above us once like a skipped beat. Dad's hand stopped halfway to the mashed potatoes. Mom's shoulders stiffened. Ethan raised his brows in mock alarm. "If you are selling knives or joining a pyramid scheme, I am not bailing you out," he said. "Army Medical Corps, I said, "combat medic track." The laughter died in his throat. Mom's face drained of color so quickly it was like someone had pulled a shade. She folded her napkin very carefully, then unfolded it again. "You just passed your board," she said. "You have offers from 3 hospitals, real hospitals, with walls and rules and air conditioning. I know. You can help people here. You do not have to ship yourself to the other side of the world for that." Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers twisted the napkin tighter and tighter. Dad stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. "You know what combat medic means, kid." I read the description. I tried for a smile. "They even have glossy brochures." He did not smile back. "That is not a brochure. That is blood and sand, and kids who do not come home." Ethan shifted in his seat. "Why?" he asked. "You hate running. You cried the last time you got a splinter. Since when did you decide you want to be G.I. Jane?" I could have made a joke. I did not. "Because I am tired of feeling like I am watching from the hallway," I said. 3 weeks before that dinner, I had been in the emergency department at St. Luke's, my first real job after nursing school. A man in his 30s came in on a stretcher, eyes wild leg, wrapped in a bloody towel. The medics shouted over each other as we rolled him into a trauma bay. Veteran. Roadside accident triggered something. He panicked and tried to jump out of a moving truck, cut himself on the guardrail, says it feels like the valley again. I remembered the way his hands shook as I held pressure on the wound, the way he whispered apologies to someone who was not there, the way he kept saying the same name over and over. Doc saved me. Doc pulled me out. Doc did not get up. Later, when the room was cleaned and the floor no longer slick with his blood, I saw him sitting with a counselor. He was calmer, his voice steadier. "You know what scares me most," he said. "Not to me, but I heard it. It is that I lived because some medic decided to go back for me when he did not have to." I had gone home after that shift and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic and coffee. My badge from St. Luke's hung straight and new. All I could think was that I was not the person in his story. I was the one who changed dressings under fluorescent lights and wrote progress notes in neat blue ink. I did good work. I knew that. It did not feel like enough. In the backyard that night after dinner, the air was thick and warm. Crickets filled the silence my parents had left behind. Dad sat on the concrete steps, a cigarette glowing between his fingers, even though he had promised Mom he would quit. He did not look at me when I opened the screen door. "She is crying in there," he said quietly. She thinks if she calls your aunt can talk you out of it. I figured. I sat next to him. The concrete was still holding the heat of the day. For a long time we listened to the cicadas and the far-off rush of a highway. You know I was in the army, he said. I know, motor pool. He nodded. 20 years. I know the sound a helicopter makes when it is coming in hot, even if I only heard it from the safety of a supply yard. I also know what happens when people think war is an adventure. I do not think it is an adventure. Then what do you think it is? I looked down at my hands. The skin on my palms was still soft then, but there were faint red lines from where I had scrubbed too hard after ER shifts. I remembered the veteran and his shaking hands, the way he had said doc. I think someone has to be the person they talk about when they say, he saved my life, I said. I think I can be that person, Dad. Or at least I want to try. He studied my profile, his eyes tired. You do not owe that to anyone. Maybe not. But I cannot stop thinking about it. About all the people who do not make it to St. Luke's because no one was there with a tourniquet and a bag of fluids. He took a long drag of his cigarette, then ground it out in a chipped ceramic dish. You know what scares me, he said. Not that you might get hurt. That is a given. What scares me is that you might see more than I ever did, and then you have to carry that, and I do not know how to help you put it down. I did not have an answer to that. The porch light hummed above us, drawing moths. You taught me how to ride a bike, I said instead. You let go even when I was terrified. This feels like that. He huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. This is nothing like that. Maybe not, but I am still asking you to let go. He rubbed his face with both hands, then dropped them palms open on his knees. If you are going to do this, he said, do it with your eyes open. Take it seriously. Learn everything. Be the best at it. That is the only way I sleep at night. I will, I said. He reached over and took my hand. His grip was rough, warm. He turned it palm up as if inspecting it. These hands, he said, were supposed to fix cars with me. They can still fix things, I said. He let go and stood, joints popping. I'm not telling your mother, he said. You can do that yourself. The recruiter's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pawn shop. The posters on the wall were bright and clean. Smiling soldiers in perfect uniforms helped children in classrooms, handed out water after hurricanes, stared heroically at sunsets. I knew enough to see the sales pitch, but I filled out the forms anyway. I wrote my name in block letters, then signed where the sergeant pointed. The pen felt heavy. During basic, my hands learned new patterns. They learned to strip a rifle and clean it in the dark. They learned to tie tourniquets tight enough to stop a femoral bleed in seconds. They learned the angles of a chest for needle decompression, the feel of a carotid pulse under sweat and grime. My body learned other things. How to run until my lungs burned, how to sleep in 3-minute snatches, how to take orders without flinching even when a voice was screaming inches from my ear. At night in the barracks, I lay on a narrow bunk and stared at the slats above me, while the other women snored softly. The chatter of the day slowed. In the spaces between breaths, the picture of that veteran in St. Luke's would come back, the tremor in his voice when he said someone had not made it home. I did not know where I would be sent when the training ended. I just knew that I would not be standing in a clean trauma bay with backup within shouting distance. Months later, the plane's wheels hit a runway that did not have a name I was allowed to repeat. When the hatch opened, the air that rushed in was dry and hot, full of dust that tasted like metal. On the tarmac, rotors chopped the sky. Helicopters rose and settled in a constant cycle. The sound filled my chest and pressed against my ribs. I stepped down with my medical pack on my back, the strap digging into my shoulder. The sun glared off the concrete. Ahead, a line of tan buildings shimmered in the heat. Someone shouted my last name over the noise. Brooks. This way. Welcome to your new favorite place. I tightened my grip on the strap of my pack and walked toward the voice, my boots leaving faint prints in the dust. They called it Camp Harlow. From the air, it was a rectangle of sandbags and concrete dropped into a valley of rock and scrub. On the ground, it was generators that never rested, plywood buildings that baked in the noon sun, and a constant restless hum that came from men and machines jammed too close together. The aid station sat near the center, a low tent with a sheet metal roof and a red cross spray painted on canvas that had already faded to brown. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic sweat and dust that managed to sneak in no matter how often we swept. My first week there, I learned the rhythm. Morning sick call with sore throats and twisted ankles. Midday heat thick enough to make the monitors glitch. Late afternoon that might be quiet if we were lucky, or might bring in 3 people at once, bleeding on stretchers, shouting about an explosion no one had seen coming. Major Ellis ran the place. He was taller than I expected, with a permanent squint and a coffee mug glued to his hand. The mug had a chipped handle and a slogan about golf that did not fit anything about this landscape. Brooks, he said the first time I reported in, you have civilian ER experience. Yes, sir. You know how to improvise. I think so. You will need more than you think. He turned away before I could answer and started rattling off how many units of blood we had, how often the generator failed, how long it took to get a helicopter in good weather. Pray for good weather, he said, and for pilots who are not already somewhere else. We had one corpsman, Hendricks, who looked about 12 until he put his gloves on. His mouth never stopped moving unless he was intubating someone. There were 2 local interpreters, a rotation of volunteers from units on the base who helped carry litters when things got bad, and a handful of stretchers leaned against the wall like folded skeletons. The first trauma that came in with me on duty was a soldier from a nearby outpost who had taken shrapnel to the arm. It was a clean wound compared to what I had been bracing for. I irrigated, numbed, and sutured while Ellis watched from the corner, arms folded. "You done this before?" he asked. In English or metric. His mouth twitched. It might have been the start of a smile. The soldier on the table stared at the canvas ceiling, jaw clenched. "Does it look bad?" he asked. "You will still be able to text your mom," I said. "Might even impress her." He snorted. His eyes shone more than he would have liked. When I wrapped the bandage, his fingers flexed and relaxed, testing the line of the stitches. "Thanks, ma'am," he said. "Guess I owe you one. Get out of here before I charge interest." Word spread faster than I expected. Harlow was small, and news that there was a new medic who did not flinch easily made the rounds. They started bringing me weird rashes, sprains, headaches that were probably just bad sleep. In between, the more serious cases arrived in bursts. A Humvee rolled in with a driver whose chest was bruised into a purple map from an IED blast. A private with a jaw broken in a fall from a gun truck. A specialist who had been too slow with his gloves near a hot barrel. They bled the same way as any patient in St. Luke's, but there were fewer hands to help and nowhere to send them if we ran out of skill. At night, the helicopters kept me company. They came and went at all hours, blades chopping the air engines, whining against the mountains. Sometimes they brought supplies or mail. Sometimes they carried stretchers inside a tangle of lines and limbs in fear. The first time we took a casualty off a bird under fire, the pilot was shouting into his headset, and dust blinded us halfway to the door. My eyes burned, my teeth filled with grit. The sound of the rotors shook my ribs. My hands did not shake. We lifted the stretcher down the patient, barely conscious mouth flecked with foam and blood. His breathing rasped against the oxygen mask. I counted out loud as I checked his pupils and felt for a pulse. "Got you," I said under my breath, though he could not hear me. "You are not going anywhere yet." After a while, days blurred. Nights blurred faster. We measured time in morphine doses and fresh dressings and how long since the last blast in the distance. Then there was Delta. Delta Squad lived 3 rows of tents over from the aid station. They were a mix of accents and ages, all strapped into the same desert uniforms, all hiding their nerves with the same jokes. They had been in the valley longer than I had. They walked like men who expected the ground to shift under their boots at any second. I got to know them through their scratches and scares. Reed sprained an ankle on loose rock and pretended it was nothing until I made him sit for an ice pack. Ostrander came in with a burned hand from grabbing the wrong part of a machine. Willis had a headache that he swore was from the smell of the latrines, not the lack of sleep. Logan Price was different. He was older than most of them, early 30s, lines starting at the corners of his eyes. He had a tattoo on his forearm of a compass and another of a set of coordinates that he never explained. "You the new miracle worker?" he asked, the first time he came in bleeding from a small cut across his scalp, where he had misjudged a low beam. "I am the one who cleans up after your bad life choices," I said, pressing gauze to his head. "Hold still." He grinned. "People back home think medics are like doctors," he said. "Do you like that? Folks confusing you with the fancy ones?" "I like people listening when I say something is wrong," I said. "That is about as far as it goes." He watched me tie the bandage, eyes sharper than the joke on his mouth. "You sound like you have had practice not being heard," he said. I taped the last corner down. "Open your mouth and say, 'ah,'" I said. He did, exaggerated, tongue out, eyes crossed. Hendricks snickered from the supply shelf. The night before they went out to the village, Delta took over a corner of the rec tent. The air was thick with the smell of instant coffee sweat and cheap card decks that had been handled by too many hands. Someone had dragged a fan in from another room, but it only pushed the hot air around more slowly. Logan sat across from me, sleeves rolled up, a stack of chips in front of him that I suspected he had won off everyone else at some point. "Brooks, you should fold," he said. "Your face gives everything away." "My face is perfect," I said. "You are just bad at reading it." Reed whistled. "Careful, Price. She patched up your head. She knows where to aim next time." I studied my cards, then the men around the table. Hendricks hovered behind them, taking it all in, eager not to miss anything. They were loud. They were relaxed in a way that felt earned. The edges of their laughter were tight, but it was laughter all the same. "You heading out early?" I asked, setting down a modest bet. 06, Logan said. Quick patrol. Check on a local elder who has been giving intel. Smile, shake hands, make sure nobody is planting anything in the road. His eyes flickered for a moment, then cleared. Should be boring, my favorite kind. I pulled in a small pile of chips. He groaned, hand to his chest. You wound me, he said. You should use those skills for good. I am practicing, I said. Consider it training. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a coin. It was old, the edges worn smooth, the design almost gone. He turned it once between his fingers, then flicked it toward me. I caught it on reflex. What is this? Lucky piece, he said. Had it since my first deployment. Figured you ought to have it. I turned it over. Whatever image had been stamped into the metal was too faded to make out. Why give it to me? In case you ever feel like you are flipping a coin on one of us, he said. Might as well have the right one. The table went quiet for half a second. Reed coughed, looked down at his cards. Ostrander shuffled the deck. You can have it back when you get bored of being lucky, I said. Deal, he said. We finished the game. I lost the coin in my pocket among lint and a folded pack of gum, but I could feel its weight when I walked back to the aid station that night. Morning came early and thin. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when the bass loudspeakers crackled to life with the same checklist they always read. Humvees growled near the motor pool. The smell of diesel and dust drifted through camp. I did a quick inventory of the aid station while Hendricks checked the oxygen tanks. Saline check. Blood units limited. Dressings, chest tubes, sutures, portable suction that only worked when the generator behaved. Ellis signed off on a stack of paperwork and scrubbed at his eyes. Outside Delta gathered near their vehicles, helmets in their hands, weapons slung. I stepped out to wave them off. Bring me back souvenirs, not injuries, I called. Reed saluted with 2 fingers. No promises, ma'am. Logan walked over the coin, absent from his hand now, though I saw his gaze flick to the pocket where he knew it sat. You hold on to that, he said. I plan to, I said. He nodded once, then slid on his helmet. The chin strap clicked into place. They drove out through the gate in a spray of dust at exactly 0600. The cloud they kicked up hung in the air for a long moment after the last vehicle was gone. Back inside, the day settled into its usual tasks. A corporal with a migraine. A sergeant with a fungal infection he swore was from the showers. The steady hum of the generator, the distant thump of artillery. At 0913, the radio on the wall came alive with a squawk so sharp it made him flinch. Ellis snatched up the handset. This is Harlow Aid Station, he said. Say again. The voice on the other end was high and tight with panic. Troops in contact. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate medevac. Repeat immediate medevac. Delta squad hit outside the village. We have men down. My stomach went cold. I set down the chart I was holding, every nerve in my body suddenly listening. Ellis pressed the handset closer to his ear, his knuckles whitening. Copy multiple casualties. Stand by for medevac, he said. He switched frequencies, called the operations center, rattled off coordinates. I listened to his side of the conversation, the pauses, the clipped replies. Visibility where? How bad you have to be kidding me. He hung up harder than necessary, the plastic casing creaking. Birds are grounded, he said. Sandstorm rolling in between here and the village. They cannot get a Blackhawk in the air until it clears. How long? They do not know. I thought of the coin in my pocket. The texture of the metal suddenly seemed sharper through the fabric. What about a ground convoy, I asked. Ellis shook his head. Roads are a mess. They hit Delta with an IED, no guarantee anything else makes it through in time. The radio crackled again as if to argue. Someone shouted a name, then there was only static. Hendricks looked at both of us. Eyes wide, fingers flexing near the drawer where we kept the trauma shears. What do we do, he asked. Ellis stared at the maps pinned on the wall for a long second, jaw working. Tell them to bring everyone they can as fast as they can, he said. We will be ready for them when they get here. He moved then fast, barking orders, pointing to stretchers, calling for more saline, more blankets, more hands to help lift. I ran with him, the room suddenly too small, too bright. My own hands moved without waiting for instructions. The rotors did not come. Instead, somewhere beyond the perimeter engines growled to life tires, chewed at rutted paths, and a convoy fought its way back toward us through heat and dust and whatever waited in the road. The first truck came in too fast. Gravel spat out under the tires as it lurched to a stop just outside the aid station. The tailgate dropped and shouting rushed in ahead of the heat. Need help here. Now. We have 3 critical, more behind us. I was already moving. The air outside hit like an oven. Dust swirled in the sunlight, turning the space between the trucks and the tent into a haze. 2 soldiers jumped down, each gripping a corner of a stretcher. The man on it stared straight up at the sky lips, moving without sound. The front of his uniform was soaked dark and sticky. My eyes went to the wound before my mind could catch up. Chest, left side. The rise and fall of his ribs was uneven, hitching shallow. With every breath, a thin foam of pink bubbled at the edge of a ragged hole. Inside, I said, "Now, keep his head steady." As we lifted the stretcher, the dog tags around his neck swung into view. Price L. For a split second, the letters did not make sense. Then they did. My stomach dropped. "Logan," I said. His eyes flickered. I did not know if he heard me. Hendricks was right behind us, dragging another gurney. A second stretcher hit the ground beside the truck. Blood pulsed from a man's thigh in hot red arcs, soaking the improvised bandage tied there. "Reed," someone shouted. "Reed is hit femoral. He is going out." I glanced once, saw the color of his skin, the way his fingers clawed at the air, then forced myself to look away. One thing at a time. If I tried to see everything at once, I would miss something important in front of me. Inside the tent, the air felt even heavier. The generator hummed, struggling to keep up. The overhead lights buzzed as if they were nervous too. "Logan first bet," I said. "Reed next. Then line the others along the wall, heads toward the center. I want IVs in all of them." Voices overlapped. Hendricks called out blood pressure readings and half numbers. Boots scuffed against the floor. Somewhere behind me, someone vomited and tried to pretend they had not. I leaned over Logan. His breathing gurgled. Each inhale sounded like liquid trying to move through a blocked pipe. "Can you hear me?" I asked. His gaze drifted toward my face. One corner of his mouth twitched. "Told you," he whispered, barely more than air. "Should have stayed boring." His chest hitched. The foam at the wound grew. "Save your jokes," I said. "You need the oxygen." Hendricks appeared at my elbow. "Oxygen sat is in the 80s since they pulled him off the truck," he said. "Pressure is low, but holding, for now." "Get a line in his other arm," I said. "Wide bore. 2 units of O-neg ready." I pressed my palm against Logan's chest, fingers splayed around the wound. Warmth flooded up between my knuckles. I could feel his heart mumbling weakly underneath, trying to keep up with a body that was losing more than it could hold. The radio on the wall chirped. I half heard Ellis shouting into it, trying again to get a helicopter. The answer did not change. Grounded, no visibility. Wait. I did a quick survey of the room, the kind they drill into you in training. 13 bodies in various states of ruin. Faces I knew. Boots still dusty from the morning. Blood already pooling under stretchers where makeshift tourniquets had not held. Logan with chest trauma that would drown him from the inside if I did not get control of it. Reed with a femoral artery that would bleed him dry in minutes if the pressure slipped. Ostrander with his abdomen laid open loops of bowel slick and exposed every breath a new insult. Willis with one side of his skull flattened just enough to make his pupils unequal. 9 more with fractures, shrapnel burns, eyes wide in shock or squeezed shut against pain. "Ellis," I called. "How long until you are back?" The answer came from the far side of the tent, where he stood with the handset pressed to his ear. "I am at a forward site. We just took wounded from another blast," he said. "I have to stabilize them before I can move. It is at least 6 hours, maybe more." 6 hours. The words hung above the room like another layer of heat. I felt the coin in my pocket hard and small against my hip. My fingers itched to touch it, but I did not. Protocol floated up from some deep-drilled place. Stabilize, manage pain, call for higher care, wait for surgical staff, do not exceed scope of practice. There were diagrams, charts, laminated cards for that. None of them had a line for 13 casualties and no doctor within 6 hours. Hendricks looked at me. His eyes were huge white around the irises. "Ma'am," he said, "what are we allowed to do?" I met his gaze. It was like looking at myself a few years back in a different uniform, waiting for someone to tell me where the limits were. I pressed my hand harder on Logan's chest. My glove squelched. The monitor above his head stuttered. "If we wait," I said, "we lose them." Hendricks swallowed. "If we do not wait," he said, "they are going to say we went rogue." Rogue, exceeded scope, violated protocol. I saw the words written in a report. I saw signatures under them. I saw a room like this one, but empty because I had followed the rules. "Take the rules off the wall," I said. "We do what we can do for as long as it takes." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." We scrubbed quickly at a sink that was meant for hand washing between dressing changes, not major procedures. The water ran pink, then red, then clear. My fingernails hidden beneath nitrile pressed half-moon dents into my own palms. I pulled on fresh gloves. They stuck slightly. The generator flickered once and the lights dimmed, then steadied. "Set up for a chest tube on Logan," I said. "Reed gets immediate pressure control and vascular access. Ostrander will need an exploratory laparotomy. Willis gets airway protection and mannitol. The rest we stabilize in order of how close they are to arresting." Hendricks stared at me as I rattled off words that belonged more in an OR than in a tent. He nodded like someone trying to catch a ball thrown too fast. "Got it," he said. "I will get everything we have." I took 1 breath. 2. The tent's walls seemed to lean in, listening. "Logan," I said, leaning back over him, You are going to feel a lot of pressure. I need you as still as you can be. Do what you have to, he murmured. We trust you, remember. His lips were already turning a shade too pale. I marked the spot between his ribs by feel and memory, the angles drilled into me in training. 4th or 5th intercostal space mid-axillary line. Avoid the neurovascular bundle that runs along the underside of each rib. Keep your hand steady even when the tent shakes from artillery in the distance. My hand did not shake. When the scalpel sliced through skin, he hissed, but he did not move away. I worked fast, spreading tissue with the tips of the hemostat, listening to the wet crackle of air trapped where it should not be. When I punctured the pleural space, a rush of air and blood slid out. The sound was obscene and relieving all at once. I guided the tube and secured it. Bubbles started in the water seal. His saturations climbed 2 points, then 3. Good, I said more to myself than to anyone else. Next. Reed was already dangerously pale. Sweat stood out along his hairline. His pulse at his wrist was a faint flutter. The tourniquet above his wound had slowed the bleeding but had not stopped it. His thigh looked swollen under the soaked bandage, the skin stretched and angry. Hey, Reed, I said. You still with me? Depends, he breathed. You going to yell at me for ignoring your advice about souvenirs? If you live, I will think about it. He gave a weak smile. It was enough. I peeled back the soaked cloth. Blood oozed steadily around it. With each heartbeat, the flow surged. Pressure, I told Hendricks. He pressed both hands down his arms, trembling. More, I said. He leaned his weight into it until his face reddened. Do not let go until I tell you, I said. I slid my hand in beside his fingers, diving into heat and slickness, following the path to where the artery had been chewed open. When I found it, the pulse kicked against my fingertips, desperate. The clamp found it too. The metal clicked shut with a small, decisive sound. The bleeding slowed, then stuttered. Reed's chest rose and fell in shorter breaths. Hang blood, I said, and keep an eye on his pressure. If it tanks again, we adjust. Between each major intervention, there was a blur of smaller ones. Needle decompression for the man whose chest sounded like a drum. Splints for fractures. Dressings layered thick over shrapnel wounds. Morphine carefully measured so pain dulled, but breathing did not. Time bent. Minutes stretched and folded. Sweat trickled down my back under the armor of my vest, soaked my t-shirt, slid along the waistband of my uniform pants. My mask itched. I forgot it was there. At some point, the generator coughed and sputtered. The lights dimmed to a sickly yellow. For a heartbeat, everything hinged on that sound. Not now, I said to the machine as if it cared. You do not die on me either. One of the local soldiers we had roped into carrying supplies pounded the side of the metal housing. The hum steadied. The lights brightened by a fraction. In textbook settings, abdominal surgery does not happen in a tent. In textbooks, you do not create a sterile field out of what you can salvage from dwindling supply crates and packets saved for when you run out of luck. Ostrander's eyes were glassy, unfocused. His abdomen rose and fell shallowly. The skin was already taking on a waxy sheen. I'm sorry, I muttered as I widened the tear the shrapnel had started. His muscles resisted for a moment, then gave way. Blood and fluid welled. The smell hit me hot and metallic. I tamped it down in my mind. I followed the steps I knew from supervised rotations and training scenarios. Control the worst bleeders first. Pack what you cannot fix. Buy time. My back screamed. My shoulders felt like they were made of sand. My fingers cramped around instruments that became extensions of my bones. Hendricks moved at the edge of my vision, passing what I asked for, guessing sometimes before I spoke. His freckles stood out sharply against skin that had gone pale under its brown. How long have we been at this? He asked, once voice hoarse. Keep working, I said. We will count later. Voices rose and fell. A few times, a monitor alarmed in a panicked tone, and we all froze for a fraction of a second, listening for which line had gone flat, which patient had slipped. Then hands flew again, adjustments made, drugs pushed. There were moments, brief and sharp, when I felt the weight of what I was doing pressed down. The chest tube, the clamping of an artery, the opening of a belly, the decisions to prioritize one over another. Each one belonged in a different setting, with more people, more oversight, more signatures at the bottom of orders. Each one happened here instead because a storm had rolled in at the wrong hour, and an explosion had gone off on a road that was supposed to be safe enough for a quick patrol. I could feel the edges of that knowledge. I could not let it fill the whole room. So I narrowed my world. I focused on the square of skin under my hands, on the exact angle of a needle, on the sound of a heart that had not yet given up. When the tent flap banged open again and Ellis finally strode in covered in dust and someone else's blood I did not notice at first. He stopped just inside the doorway. I felt his presence like a new weight in the air. For a moment he said nothing. His gaze swept over the rows of cots, the lines of tubing, the bags of fluid, the faint rising and falling of 13 chests. Hendricks moved past him with a full sharps container, eyes fixed on where he was going, as if afraid to break stride. Ellis stepped closer to the central table where I was finishing a set of sutures on Logan's chest, closing the incision where the chest tube now nestled. "Report," he said finally, voice rough. 13 casualties from Delta, he said without looking up. My hands were not free yet. Multiple penetrating injuries, 1 probable brain injury, 1 abdominal, 1 major vascular. All currently stable enough for transport if we can get it. He stared. I could feel it more than see it. "Who authorized this level of intervention?" he asked. I tied off the last stitch. The thread tugged the skin edges together neat and straight. I cut it clean. "No one," I said. "It needed to be done." He looked around again. At the makeshift instrument table, at the blood that spattered the tarp under my boots, at the improvised drapes and the careful rows of used suture packets. "You performed all of these procedures yourself?" he asked. "With Hendricks assisting," I said, "and a few extra sets of hands when we needed them." He let out a breath that might have been a curse. "Every single one of them is still breathing," he said. "Yes." The word felt heavy and light at the same time. He did not answer. He moved from bed to bed, checking pupils, listening to lungs, looking at the dressings. He adjusted a drip here, a tape there. When he finished his circuit, he came back to where I stood. "We will get them to the surgical hospital as soon as the weather clears," he said. "Try not to let any of them die before then." "We are doing our best," I said. The next 72 hours blurred into a haze of transport arrangements, follow-up care, and paperwork that seemed to multiply every time I glanced away. One by one, the helicopters finally came. The storm passed, the blades roared, and we loaded the stretchers on board. Logan went up first. Reed squeezed my wrist weakly as they carried him past. Ostrander's lips moved in a silent prayer. Willis lay quiet, head bandaged, monitors beeping with stubborn steadiness. When the last rotor wash faded and the pad was empty, the aid station felt too quiet. Then the questions started. There were forms to fill out. Initial notes were not enough. They wanted detailed descriptions of every procedure, every drug, every deviation from protocol. At first I wrote mechanically. Time, action, rationale, response. Then there were interviews over video with people whose uniforms were crisp and whose offices had framed diplomas on the walls. They looked at me through screens, eyes narrowed in polite concern. "Captain Brooks, at what point did you decide to initiate unsanctioned surgical procedures?" "At the point where waiting guaranteed death," I said. "Were you aware that your scope of practice does not include independent performance of thoracic and abdominal surgery?" "Yes." "Why did you proceed anyway?" "Because there was no one else, and they were already dying." Some of them nodded as if they understood. Others wrote notes without looking up their pens, scratching like insects. Rumors leaked in from the outside. I heard that some doctors had called me textbook under pressure. I heard others call me dangerous. At night, when the generator finally quieted and the air cooled, I lay on my bunk and stared into the dark. The sounds of the camp went on as always. Men laughed somewhere, cards slapped against a table, boots thudded past my door. Behind my eyelids I saw hands, my hands covered in blood. Logan's hand slipping a coin across a table. Reed's hand clawing for something to hold. Ostrander's fingers twitching against the sheet. Sometimes the hand stopped moving. I would wake with my own clenched away. Just so tight my nails cut into my palms. The official word came 8 months later, near the end of my deployment. I sat in Ellis's small office while he read the email on his screen and summarized it out loud. "You are cleared of wrongdoing," he said. "The board acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances. They recommend additional training and commend your initiative." He paused. "There is also a notation in your file. Exceeded scope of practice in critical situation without authorization. They call it a caution." "A black mark," I said. He did not contradict me. "It may complicate certain assignments if you decide to make this your career," he said. "Command positions, specialized programs." I looked at the wall behind his head. There was a map tacked there, red pins marking incidents from the past, year dates scribbled in the margins. "I will finish out my term," I said. "After that, I will see." He studied me for a moment. You saved 13 men that day," he said. "Yes, you know that." "Knowing it does not make the nightmare stop," I said. He nodded once slow. "It does not," he said. "When my contract ended, the flight home felt wrong. The plane was full of people in gear, but there were no stretchers. No urgent shouting. No monitors. Only the rustle of uniforms and the occasional clink of a dog tag against a metal buckle. Out the small window, the sand faded to water, then clouds, then nothing. I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around the coin Logan had given me. The edges were as smooth as they had been the night in the wreck tent, but it felt heavier. I squeezed it until the metal dug into my skin, and I tried not to picture a tent in a valley and 13 names that would stay with me regardless of what any file said. Seattle was green in a way Afghanistan never could be. From the air, it was water and trees and neat lines of streets. On the ground, it was coffee shops on every corner, people walking dogs in raincoats, and a hospital with glass walls that shone in the gray light. Rainier Regional Medical Center sat on a hill looking out over the city. The first time I walked into its lobby, the floors were polished so smooth I could see my reflection. I wore a new set of scrubs and a badge that said me Brooks RN. The nurse manager who interviewed me flipped through my file. St. Luke's ER, she said. Strong recommendations, and you were in the Army Medical Corps. Yes. Her eyes skimmed the page. There was a line about my deployment about trauma care with limited resources. There was not a line about the notation on my record. That lived in a different file in a different system. That must have been intense, she said. You will find we do things a bit differently here. More structure, clear lines about who does what. I can follow lines, I said. They hired me into the cardiac OR within a month. Rainier had protocols for everything. Checklists, double sign-offs, color-coded badges. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and machine coffee. The worst injury I saw some weeks was a resident's pride when a senior surgeon corrected his incision. Dr. Cole Whitman became a constant in my days. He was as skilled as everyone said. He moved around the operating table with the assurance of someone who believed the room belonged to him. When he talked about valves and grafts, his voice softened with real focus. When he talked to nurses, it often sharpened. Try to anticipate Brooks, he would say. You are just a nurse, but I know you can manage that. At first, the words slid over old armor. I had been shouted at louder under worse conditions. Over time, they wore grooves. I learned the routines of the OR. I charted every medication correctly, caught small errors before they reached the patient, filled in gaps the way a good nurse does. My evaluations were positive, efficient, calm, detail-oriented. No one at Rainier knew what had happened in a tent in a valley on a day when the helicopters could not fly. I kept it that way. The Tuesday that changed it started like others. Gray light at 6 a.m, coffee that tasted like burnt beans and hope. The surgery board already full. 4 bypasses, 1 valve replacement, a repair on a congenital defect. Dr. Whitman liked to stack his cases. He said it kept him sharp. By mid-morning, we were on our second case, a routine bypass on a man in his 50s. The room hummed in its usual way. Jenna handled instruments. The perfusionist watched the heart-lung machine with a patience that never cracked. I stood at my usual place, eyes on the field and the monitor. We were finishing the last graft when the intercom crackled. Or 3, the charge nurse's voice said. We have an add-on for you. Emergency cardiac case. Male 43, veteran chest pain and arrhythmia. Possible acute coronary syndrome. Consent is signed. You will get the chart in a minute. Of course we do, Whitman muttered. Because the schedule was not tight enough. He did not look up from what he was doing. We closed and cleaned. The team moved with that extra notch of speed that comes when there is another patient already waiting. By the time environmental services had wiped down the last surface, the stretcher with the new case was outside the door. I met him in the pre-op bay. He lay there in a hospital gown, paper thin over a chest that had known more than just soft beds. His hair had gone lighter at the temples, but the muscle in his arms was still visible. His right forearm was a collage of ink. I read the name on his wristband before my eyes traveled to the tattoos. Price Logan. The air seemed to thin. His face was turned slightly away, eyes closed, breathing shallow from the pain and whatever medication they had already given him. I let my hands move on their own. Stickers on his chest, blood pressure cuff, IV check, routine. The ink on his arm finally came into focus. The compass, the coordinates, a unit insignia I had last seen on dusty sleeves. The world shifted sideways for a second. The fluorescent light buzzed. My fingers paused, then continued. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Khanna, glanced at me. You good, Brooks? She asked. Fine, I said, just making sure the line is solid. On his other wrist, the plastic band gleamed. Under his name, the word allergies was followed by none known. Under that, the word veteran was printed in small letters. I smoothed the tape, straightened, and stepped back. They wheeled him into OR3. The lights were bright again. The air was cool. The table stood waiting. We transferred him over. He groaned once as his chest shifted. The monitor beeped in protest at the change in leads, then settled into a pattern of irregular spikes. Whitman came in, already gloved mask tugged into place. All right, people, he said. This one has been unstable in the cath lab. Let us make this quick. I have actual complex cases later. Jenna's jaw tightened. She said nothing. I checked the tray again, counted instruments in my head. Pacing wires ready, grafts prepared, suction tested. Khanna began her induction. Drugs went in. Logan's breathing slowed. Confirming loss of lash reflex, she said. He is under. Good, Whitman said. Scalpel. His hand extended. I placed the scalpel in it. He made the first incision crisp and smooth. The monitor beeped. The heart on the screen moved in uneven arcs. The smell of cauterized tissue rose sharp in my nose. Retractor, he said. I handed it over. The rhythm settled into something I knew too well. His commands, our responses, the team a machine in its own right. He glanced at the monitor. Pressure is softer than I like, he said. Let us keep this efficient, people. He did not look at me when he added, Try to keep up, Brooks. You are just a nurse, not a magician. Jenna shifted her weight. The anesthesiologist's eyes flicked over the drape at us, then back to her monitors. I focused on my hands on the next instrument on the measured steps of the procedure. A few minutes in there was a change. It was small at first. A faint twitch in Logan's eyelids. A slight shift in the muscles of his jaw. Kana, I said quietly, he is moving. I see it, she said, already adjusting the infusion. Could be a light plane. I am correcting. Before the medication could fully take hold, his lashes fluttered again. His eyes opened a crack, hazy and unfocused, but not empty. They tracked across the bright lights, the metal arms, the blue of the drapes, until they found my face above the mask and cap. For a moment, nothing moved. Then his lips parted. Captain, he croaked. His voice was rough, the word pushed out on a thin breath. Captain Brooks. The room seemed to stop. The heart-lung machine still hissed. The monitor still beeped. The suction still whispered. Yet every person in that space froze. Whitman's hand stopped mid-motion. What did he say, he asked. Kana reached for the syringe, eyes wide. He should not be conscious, she said. I am increasing. Logan's gaze locked on mine. There was recognition there, pushing through the drugs. Korangal, he whispered. 13 of us. You remember. My throat felt tight. Logan, I said, you need to relax. Let the meds work. He shook his head a fraction of an inch. She pulled us out, he said, voice gaining a thread of strength. He was not talking to me then. He was talking to the room. No doctor. Sandstorm, 11 hours. She did not let any of us die. Jenna's eyes were huge above her mask. The circulating nurse had stopped writing in the chart. Even the perfusionist had turned his head slightly. Whitman stared at me over his mask. Is that true? He asked. I could feel every gaze in the room pressing against my skin. The old tent rose up in my mind, the smell of blood and dust and generator exhaust layered over the antiseptic and filtered air. Kana pushed more propofol. Logan's eyes began to drift. He fought them for another second. 13 men, he mumbled. She saved my whole squad. His lids closed. The lines on the monitor smoothed as the anesthesia deepened. The silence that followed was not the usual focused quiet of an OR. It was brittle, charged. Whitman looked at me as if he had never seen me before. Brooks, he said slowly, we are in the middle of a case. Yes, doctor, I said. My voice sounded different in my own ears, thinner pulled tight. Then let us finish it, he said. He turned back to the open chest. His hands found their rhythm again, but the easy arrogance was gone. Instructions came more softly. He asked for confirmation instead of assuming. No one repeated his joke about just a nurse. We worked mostly without speaking. The team moved as it always did, but every so often someone's eyes would flick to me quick and questioning before darting away. When the grafts were in and the heart was beating on its own again, there was a collective exhale. Kana adjusted the ventilator. The dressings went on. The final sutures closed the skin. We rolled Logan to recovery. The transport team pushed the stretcher out of the OR, the wheels bumping over the threshold. I walked beside him, hand on the railing in case a line snagged. Jenna caught my sleeve for a second as we passed through the doors. You never told us, she said softly. About what I asked. Her eyes searched mine. About any of that. There was not a place for it on the intake form, I said. Her mouth pressed into a line. She let go. In the recovery room, Logan lay under warm blankets, monitors clicking softly. The anesthesia had not fully worn off. His face was slack, but his brow furrowed now and then as if he were arguing with someone in a dream. I checked his lines. Blood pressure stable, heart rhythm regular if a little sluggish. Chest dressings dry, chest tube output measured and acceptable. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching the rise and fall of his chest. A faint stir in the hallway drifted in the sound of voices pitched low. Word moved fast in a place like Rainier. By the time I left the bedside, I could feel it in the way people glanced at me, as if I had grown a second shadow. Logan woke properly a few hours later. I was there when his eyes opened. He blinked at the ceiling, then slowly turned his head toward me. So it is really you, he said, his voice stronger now, threaded with something like wonder. I thought I dreamed you up. You are in a cardiac unit in Seattle, I said. You are not dreaming. He shifted his hand under the blanket. The IV tugged. I owe you two now, he said. That is getting excessive. I pulled a chair closer and sat. You remember what you said in the OR, I said. They will not let me forget, most likely, he said. I was trying to tell them who you are. I looked at his face, older and less angular than the one in the photo in my tin, and at the way his eyes had not changed at all. I am a nurse, I said. Sure, he said. That is one word for it. He drew in a slow breath. Do you know that all 13 of us made it, he asked. Every single one from that day. I nodded. They told me when they pulled you out to the bigger hospital, I said. Transport notes came back. That was the beginning, he said. You know where we are now. He started to talk. Reed teaching history at a high school where the kids thought war was a movie until he explained otherwise. Ostrander running a construction crew in Michigan building houses from the ground up. Willis working as a physical therapist who specialized in veterans guiding other broken bodies through their own repairs. Names and places, jobs and families. Weddings, rehab, setbacks, recoveries. He spoke of 4 of them who met every year on the same date, in the same diner calling it their 2nd birthday. He spoke of messages shared when someone had a bad night and sleep would not come of the group that had formed around that one day in the valley. I listened and let the details settle in my chest heavier than the coin had ever felt. Do you know what you gave us? He asked finally. I looked at the IV lines, the monitor, the faint sheen of sweat on his upper lip. I gave you a headache and a scar, I said. He shook his head on the pillow. You gave us time, he said. Everything after that day sits on what you did. Every birthday, every bad joke, every kid who got born because we did not die on that floor. His eyes shone, mine burned. I had carried that day like a stone for years. Hearing him, it looked different. Not lighter, just different. I sat there in the white light of the recovery room with the faint beep of the monitor marking each second, and I did not know what to do with the weight of all their tomorrows resting between us. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, people I barely knew were finding reasons to pass through the cardiac unit. They lingered near the nurse's station, flipping through charts that did not belong to them, glancing my way and then away. In the break room, the stories had already taken on a life of their own. I heard she did surgery in a tent, one of the PACU nurses whispered to another. Like real surgery, by herself. They said there were 13 of them, someone else added. All hit at once, all lived. Luis waved his sandwich in the air. You all do realize she can hear you, he said. Her ears still work. They laughed embarrassed and lowered their voices. They did not stop talking. HR sent an email asking me to come up to their offices on the administrative floor. The carpet there was thicker. The walls had framed photos of smiling staff at charity runs and holiday parties. The HR representative, a woman named Rachel with a neat bun and sensible shoes, folded her hands. We have had inquiries, she said. The veterans liaison mentioned your service. One of our physicians accessed your military records. There is interest in highlighting your story for our community outreach. Local news might want an interview. We would, of course, only proceed with your consent. Her smile was kind. The idea of cameras and questions made my stomach knot. I'm not sure that is necessary, I said. It could be great for our veteran patients to see, she said. To know there is someone here who understands what they have been through. I understand them whether there is a camera or not, I said. She hesitated, then nodded. Think about it, she said. No pressure. Outside her office, the window looked over the city. Rain streaked the glass in narrow lines. Dr. Whitman called me to his office the day after Logan was transferred out of the intensive care unit. His space was tidy shelves lined with textbooks and journals, a few family photos, a framed certificate or two. The blinds were half open, letting in gray light. He did not sit behind his desk. He stood near the window hands in the pockets of his white coat. Close the door, please, Brooks, he said. I did. On the desk, my personnel file lay open. Next to it, someone had printed a portion of a different file, the one with government letterhead in language that did not come from this hospital. He touched the corner of the page with one finger. I read everything I could get my hands on, he said. What they allowed anyway. Commendations, incident reports, that delightful phrase about exceeding your scope in a critical situation. I stayed where I was. Yes, doctor, I said. He looked at me, really looked not that quick assessing glance he gave when assigning tasks. I have been your attending for 3 years, he said. In that time I have treated you and the rest of the nursing staff as if you were extensions of the equipment. Necessary but replaceable, peripheral. His mouth tightened. I used phrases I should never have used. I said, just a nurse, more times than I can count. I thought it was harmless, a joke. It was not. The words hung there between us. His hands were very still in his pockets. I am sorry, he said. Not because you turned out to be some battlefield legend, but because I was wrong long before I knew that. For a second I saw him under different lights, not just the OR glare. A younger man once may be taught that the person with the most years of training automatically knew best. A man who had never had to work in a room where no one else was coming through the door. Respect should not depend on a story like that, I said. It should live in how we treat the people beside us every shift. He nodded once. I agree, he said. So I want to change how we do that here. I have already spoken with administration. We are starting an initiative to improve collaboration between physicians and nurses. Shared case reviews. More weight on nursing assessments. Less theater in the OR. His mouth twisted briefly. I would like your input, he said, if you are willing. The idea of sitting in meetings with him in a room full of other doctors did not exactly thrill me. Still, there was something in his face that had not been there before, an uncertainty, a willingness to listen. I will think about it, I said. He accepted that. As for Logan, he healed the way stubborn people do, slowly at first, then all at once. On his last follow-up visit before discharge, he sat in a clinic chair in street clothes, a sweatshirt hiding the surgical scar that still pulled oddly when he moved. He handed me a folded piece of paper. What is this? I asked. Phone numbers, he said. Emails. Not all 13, but most of us. We set up a group chat. We argue about sports and send terrible jokes at midnight. You should be there. I took the paper. 12 names, 12 numbers and addresses. At the bottom, a line that said Harlow 13. You do realize I'm not good with group messages, I said. That is fine, he said. We will be good enough for both of us. He stood carefully, hand pressing once against his chest. A few of us are getting together next month in Georgia, he said. Near where you grew up, I think. You should come. It is about time the guest of honor showed. The idea of seeing all of them in one place made my pulse jump. Parties were not exactly my comfort zone, but this was not a party in the usual sense. I will see what my schedule looks like, I said. He smiled like he heard the yes under the words. The park in Georgia sat near a slow river, the air thick with humidity and the smell of cut grass. Kids shrieked somewhere near a playground. Someone had spread folding tables under a pavilion and coolers sat packed with ice and soda. They were there when I arrived. 13 men older now scattered around picnic tables and folding chairs. Some with canes propped nearby, some with a stiffness in their movements that spoke of old injuries, some moving easily. None of them were on stretchers. They turned as one when I walked up. Captain Brooks Reed called, grinning. We were starting to think you got lost. Hard to get lost in a park, I said. Logan came forward, his chest rising and falling without strain. You came, he said. I did, I said. They introduced their families, wives, husbands, parents, children who hid behind legs at first and then edged closer when they realized there was food involved. At one point, a boy of about 7 trotted up to me, hair sticking up, face smudged with ketchup. My dad says you fixed him, he said. Your dad did most of the work, I said. I just helped his body catch up to his stubbornness. The boy held out his hand. His fingers were small, sticky with melted popsicle. Thank you anyway, he said. I shook his hand. You are welcome, I said. Later, when the kids ran off to chase a soccer ball, Logan gathered the squad in a loose circle near one of the tables. Someone handed me a small wooden plaque wrapped in plain paper. Open it, Logan said. The paper crinkled under my fingers. Inside was a piece of polished wood, dark and smooth. 13 names were carved into it in neat rows. Below them, in slightly larger letters, were 4 words. She gave us tomorrow. My throat closed. I traced one of the carved names with my thumb. The wood was warm from the sun. Had a guy in town do the engraving, Ostrander said. He usually does trophies. Thought this counted. I laughed once too close to tears to make it sound casual. This is going on my kitchen counter, I said, where I can trip over it every morning. Logan nodded. Good, he said. You should have to look at what you did. Back in Seattle, the hospital settled into a new rhythm. The emails about interviews died down when I politely refused enough times. A brief internal newsletter blurb mentioned a member of our staff with distinguished military service. No one put a camera in my face. Some things did change. In morning huddles, Whitman started asking for nursing input first, not last. In case conferences, he occasionally said Brooks caught this without making it sound like a surprise. When a resident talked over Jenna in a debrief, he stopped the conversation, went back, and asked her to repeat her point. It was not perfection. Old habits did not vanish because of one story. They shifted, though, and that was something. I started taking on more of the new nurses, showing them how to read the subtle changes on a monitor, how to trust that itch at the back of their minds when something felt off. One afternoon, I walked past a resident telling a fresh hire at the nurses' station, "Relax, you are just a nurse. The attending will handle the hard stuff." The words hit like a pebble in a still pond. I stopped. The new nurse, a woman with wide eyes and a nervous smile, glanced between us. The resident looked up, oblivious. "Do not use that phrase on this floor," I said. He frowned. "What phrase?" "Just a nurse," I said. "There is no just in what we do here. If you want to keep your patients safe, start by respecting the people who spend the most time with them. Color rose in his cheeks. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. Understood, he said. The new nurse's shoulders eased a fraction. She met my eyes and gave a small, grateful nod. Later, as I walked the main corridor, the rain traced its usual pattern down the glass. The sound of monitors floated from open doors. Someone laughed faintly at the far end of the hall. Somewhere else, a machine chimed for attention. I took my phone from my pocket. The background was a photo I had taken of the plaque on my kitchen counter, the carved names catching the morning light. My hand looked different in the picture than it had in the tent. Older. Scar lines faded, grip steadier. I slid the phone away and tightened my ponytail. Ahead, an OR light flicked on, casting a bright circle into the hall. "Brooks," Jenna called from the doorway. "You scrubbing in?" "Yeah," I said. I walked toward her, toward the white of the operating room and the steady beep of the monitor waiting inside. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.